So once it says, right, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're situated. Like to introduce you to Anthony Rose from Seed Legals. We're going to spend half an hour discussing different elements of the legal part of setting up a business, but also the fundraising part. And maybe, Anthony, you can give us sort of a little bit of an introduction about yourself and what you specialize in.
Yeah, so hey, I'm Anthony. Years ago, I used to head up BBC iPlayer. After I left the BBC, I built a startup, sold it, built a startup, sold it, invested in a few, got tired of paying lawyers, met my co-founder, Laurent, genius, ex-VC and serial angel investor, and created Seed Legals so that no one else has to go to a lawyer for your legal. So if you're starting a company, raising investment, giving share options to your team. There's a platform for that. But importantly, I'm not here to sell Seed Legals, but with 50,000 or so companies on Seed Legals, I talk to lots and lots of founders. We see the problems that people have, and I'm here to share feedback from that to help you on your journey faster.
Anthony, I love that because you're the right person to talk to us about this subject. So that's superb. But also, you've been through the whole startup world. We at 12 Ronnies, we're all about helping people launch businesses. So it's all about getting them through the ideation stage to a stage where they're ready to launch and hopefully launch to customers, which it's all about, and have the right structures and plans in place to grow their businesses. So I've got a series of questions to ask, and I see that some are going into the chat sort of at the moment. So let me ask Bill. Bill's actually mirroring a question I was going to ask. So I'm going to put this on screen. So Anthony, really, when when you're looking to put a legal infrastructure in place for your business, what sort of paperwork's needed? When you're actually getting round to going, okay, I
Sure.
need to get something in place. What do you guys at Seed Legals do? What's the
Got
sort of
it.
standard things to be done?
Easy. So here goes, which is let's go through your startup journey. So, where some point you have an idea. You might be in the pub chatting with people. You might be going on a run. You have an idea. And either it's just you or you've got a co-founder, but usually it's with a co-founder. So a couple of people have an idea. And it's just a hobby at some point, right? Don't spend money on legals, don't create a company yet. But at some point, you've done a bit of user research and you go, this is something I now want to spend some time of my life on. And it moves from a hobby to a thing. So at that point, you probably want to incorporate a company. You can do this on Companies House. It costs you £50, takes half an hour. It's super easy. If you don't need the company afterwards, it's a bit more problematic to get rid of it, but it's certainly easy to start. And at that point, the purpose of a company is a legal structure that lets you have agreements with the company. You can have deductions and costs and revenue in the company and so on. So a company becomes a useful thing to create when it goes from hobby to a thing. And now that you've got a company, you can begin to have agreements with the company. So the very first set of agreements you generally want are what we call founder agreements. So let's say that two founders got together in the pub. You create a company, you normally make 100 shares, so that would be 50 shares each. And then it turns out a couple of weeks later, you have a founder fallout, or you want to give up your day job and spend every time on it, and the other person doesn't. Bastard, what do we do?
These are
So
common scenarios. Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
A good fraction of the time, founders just doesn't work out. One of them exits stage left. And the problem is, if you don't have an agreement that says they have to give back some of their shares, you now have a company with a departed founder and a whole bunch of shares, and that is really uninvestable. So the first thing to do is a founder agreement. Sorry. Okay.
Bless you.
A founder agreement that says if I leave anytime in the next 3 years, I have to give back some of my shares. It also contains non-disclosure and IP assignment, which means anything we've worked on for this project belongs to the company. And this IP assignment is really important because when you do your first funding round, maybe you've got friends and family investors. They're going to go, great, we'll invest 10K. They don't know much about the legals and non-disclosures and warranties and so on. So what they have is they'll happily invest. But when you get your next round with a VC investor, as part of their due diligence, they're going to check that everyone who's worked on this project has assigned the intellectual property to the company and has an NDA and so on. So make sure that everyone who does any work on the company has a consulting or an advisor agreement. And once upon a time, that used to be a huge amount of effort and expense, and lawyers would charge you hundreds of pounds per agreement. But if you're on Seed Legals, you can do this. It's a low monthly cost, and also there's a 7-day free trial. So if you are missing any documents, you just go on Seed Legals now, and you can create all these documents for free, and then you have papered, so to speak, your initial, team. One of the other important things is that by not having founder agreements, you're kicking the can into the long grass on the difficult conversations, because often the conversation is, what's the equity split? Who's CEO? Who's COO? Whatever it might be. And if you can't agree on this, and you've just had a few pints at the pub, great, go your own way. But if you've been working on this for 6 months and built a prototype, and now you can't agree on the basics, you might find you can't even continue with your own idea because someone else has got a claim on it. So those are the most important early stage documents. And of course, later on, when you raise investment, you can have a shareholders agreement and other documents for that investment.
But these so these founder agreements are like agreements that you have if you've got consultants or service providers, and you want to keep what's built into the company. You want all the IP being in the company, not just sitting with the individuals of the company. It's about coalescing everything inside the company structure.
That's right. So you can think of it as a sort of the company's a strange legal kind of concept that it owns everything, investors are investing in it, and people can come and go. And often people do come and go, right? If your company's 7 years old, I mean, it's 200 people. Many of the initial people are no longer with the company. So it has to survive, whether it be a consultant who's getting little or no equity, or a founder that owns 50% of the equity. The company as a whole needs to survive and continue, and that's what investors want to see. So founder agreements are designed for founders who've got a lot of shares and have to give back their shares, and consultant and advisor agreements are basically agreements to say, you're going to do some work, and I'm going to pay you when the work is done, and I might give you some shares or share options because I don't have enough money to pay you or to sweeten the deal. And so it describes what they're going to do and what they're going to get in return.
Got it. So in the case of 12 Ronnies, it was almost as you described, that it was a bunch of us got together in a pub, as we do in the UK.
You mean there were 13 Ronnies originally, and now there are only 12?
We're not disclosing how many Ronnies, but I can tell you something. There aren't 12, and none of us are called Ronnie. How many times have I said that? But Anthony, when we're getting together and discussing the ideas, and we haven't formed a company, should we be looking at a founder agreement at the idea stage to say, look, what we're discussing and our ideas and our IP has an agreement between us, or should we wait till we form a company? And when should we even put the legal structure of a company in place? I know there's a couple of questions wrapped up in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's possible that the founders can have an agreement between each other. We don't do those on Seed Legals. All the things we do on Seed Legals are between a company and other parties. So you might be able to do some searches on the internet and so on. But my thinking is that as soon as it has any value, you're going to create a company. If you meet in the pub, it's not like, hey, let's make some legal contracts between us. No, I mean, it's informal, it's a fun thing. And when it gets serious, at this point, you incorporate. And it's, because it's so easy to incorporate in the UK, and then you have agreements between the company and each party, rather than between each party individually. It's not to say it's impossible to do. No. We don't just see it as a major use case. And so we don't have those sort of one-to-one individual documents.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that sort of backs up a lot of the advice we give at 12 Ronnies about starting a business. Don't formalize your business structure. until you've done a lot of work in validating the ideas. You're wasting your time and money creating products, putting a whole business structure in place if the idea you've got is a poor business idea that's deemed to fail because you're not really set up to find customers for it, or it's something customers don't want. So that sort of backs up our don't form a company too early in the idea.
Exactly. One of the things you also want to avoid is the biggest one you want to avoid is co-founders has some split up with you, and now you've got some agreements that prevent you doing what was your idea, right? So I think you want a fair amount of freedom initially, because you have to work out during this dating period that it's something you want to do together. And if the dating doesn't work, you don't get married on the first date, right? There's a bit of dating, and you work out in that period. You can go your own way, and at some point it coalesces enough that you're now going to create the contracts and the structure as if you're going to be together in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, following it with actually another question, really, because you mentioned about seed legals and about the UK. Now, a lot of our audience are also based in the US. How does this relate to the US, and what sort of support can founders get in the US for legal structures, whether it's through seed legals or any partners that you deal with?
So there is no seed legals in the US at the moment. The good news is there will be a seed legals in the US before the end of the year. So if you are looking to set up, please drop me a note on LinkedIn, and I'd love to see how we can help. But in the meantime, there are companies like Clarkey and others that will do some of those. I think F6S has got some founder agreements. Some of these are kind of like templates. You have to work things out yourself. Our model is that we'll take you through all the things that you need to think about, and we'll give you data to show what's market standard, and then we'll build the agreements. Failing that, you'll need to look at other solutions. The US also has some complexity because it depends which state you're in and so on. One of the other interesting things in the US, and I don't profess to be an expert on the US, but of course you have to pick a state that you're going to incorporate in, and you need to pick a company type. So in the UK, literally 100% of investable companies are LTD or limited companies. You can create a CIC, a community interest company, but those are mostly charities. So essentially, your choice is very simple. I'm going to create an LTD company. If you're in the US, your first choice is, am I going to incorporate in Delaware or somewhere else? Delaware is the standard for VC investable companies. Most VCs will only invest if you're a Delaware company, because that's what they understand. So if you're an Etsy trader and you're just looking to create some trading company, great. If you live in Wyoming, do Wyoming. Or you can shop around and find a state that's inexpensive or has great taxes or whatever. But if you want to be a VC investable company, Delaware is the way to go. And the other thing to know is, should you be a C corporation, like an Inc., or an LLC? And many founders don't understand that and get that wrong. So essentially, an LLC is what's called a pass-through tax structure. So you're taxed, any revenue made by the company essentially flows through to the shareholders in the company, whereas a C corporation is the taxes are paid by the company, and then it pays its employees and so on separately, kind of like a UK limited company. So LLCs are great if you're a sole trader and you're a contractor doing work and you want to put it through a company. It gives you legal liability shielding through the company, but isn't really useful for companies raising investment. And the last thing to know is, in the US, there's something called QSBS, which is a tax saving for investors. So investors will pay no capital gains tax, no federal capital gains tax, if they keep their shares for 5 years. But it only works if you've got a C corporation. So basically, if you're planning to be an equity fueled growth startup, Delaware C corporation is the answer.
Well, that actually answers a couple of questions, both from the one that Christopher Norris has put up. Does it matter where you're registered, type of thing there? But also, I've set up a business that we're ready to sort of launch. We've come out of beta testing for a marketplace for innovative new products that I'm actually doing with Christopher in the States. And we've set up a Delaware LLC. We're not looking for investment for it, and it was the simplest structure we could put in place. And so and also Stripe Atlas offer easy sort of setups for us to do that there. So that's sort of, from what you've said there, it sounds like, okay, we've probably made the right approach then with that. So yeah, excellent. I wanted to move slightly more, because you've mentioned about also there of the fundraising side and why you would maybe not use an LLC if you're fundraising. And I think that here's I'm just putting up a question that we had earlier. Let me just show this question. On the fundraising side, what do you need? I mean, you've talked about the company aspect of the founders agreements and the agreements into the company. But if you're also fundraising, and you've mentioned there about an LLC might not be the right structure for fundraising, what else do you need to put in place, both UK, US, or anything else?
Okay, all right. Well, I'll talk generally.
Generally,
And
yeah.
so the first I'm going to talk about doing a funding round, and then I'm going to talk about not doing a funding round. So let me explain. So once upon a time, the only way companies raise capital, apart from borrowing from the bank, which doesn't work for companies that are going to spend money and not make money for a while, is to do a funding round. So what's a funding round? I think of a funding round like holiday trip with a bus, and everyone has to get on the bus. So you have to wait for the last investor to arrive. You have to pack the bus with all of them. It can only leave when the late stragglers have arrived. And so the problem is it's long and slow. And importantly, you don't have any money while you are waiting for them all to get together. So there you are doing a funding round, and you meet an investor and they go, "Hey, can I invest?" And you go, "That's amazing. Come back in October." Whereas what you'd really want to go is, "Yes, can I send you an agreement and get your money this afternoon?" So the funding round has a set of legal documents, a shareholders agreement. There's a new articles, or in the US it's called the certificate of incorporation, and a range of other documents that are over many decades have been honed to protect the rights of investors and protect the rights of the founders, because they, of course, sometimes see eye to eye and sometimes they don't. Founders might want to, maybe you get as a founder an offer to sell your company for £10 million, which is awesome, right? You're going to tell your spouse, "Honey, I sold the company for 10 mil. I've owned 50%. That's great." But for an investor who invested in a 20 million valuation round, they just lost half their money. So what you want is a set of checks and balances that have been honed over the years. And what we've done on Seed Legals is we've got a workflow that takes the founders through these decisions to be made. We educate them on what it means, and we have data over thousands of funding rounds to show what's market standard. So if your investor says, "I want preference shares," should you reject it because it's an outrageous request, or would you be the only idiot trying to reject it because it's a completely common request? And you wouldn't know. So you'd go on to Seed Legal's Termometer, or as part of the round, we'd take you through, these are things an investor might want. If you're raising a small round, say no to this. If it's a bigger round, probably you can't say no to it. And now you understand everything that investors will want and everything that you will want as well. So what we've done over thousands of rounds is to look at when things go right and when things go wrong. So for example, a nice Easter egg surprise for many founders when they do a round on Seed Legals is, of course, as a founder, you're probably paying yourself much below market rate as a salary. You could be earning £150,000 a year elsewhere. You're getting £40,000 a year as founder of your own company, but you've got lots of equity. Wouldn't it be great if you could sell some of your shares? And in the UK, you pay only 10% capital gains tax and no income tax if you sell some shares up to £1 million, which is great. So, but usually the investors don't want you to sell your shares because they don't want the founders cashing out. So you can't sell your shares. So on Seed Legals, we build in a provision to let you sell some of your shares so that you can do this easily if you find a buyer. So it's these little things that one day you go, I wish I could sell some shares. Oh, wait, that's built in. And you might now design the way you fundraise and build your business so that you can sell some shares and pay off a mortgage and so on later. So anyway, doing a funding round is quite slow. You have to get all the investors on the bus together. And so wouldn't it be great if you meet someone at an event and they say, can I invest? And you go, instead of saying come back in October, you go, yes. And so there's a new fashion. I call it, or we call it on Seed Legals, agile fundraising, which means raising before a funding round, doing a funding round, and top up a round. And so in the US, the instrument for doing that is called a SAFE. In the UK, we call it a seed fast. In both cases, it's a very simple document that says, I'm going to give you money now. And when you do a funding round later, you're going to give me shares. And to incentivize me to come in now, instead of waiting, you're going to give me a 10 or 20% discount on the valuation that the shareholders or investors will pay later, or you might cap my investment. So I'm investing at, let's say, a 5 million cap. But if your next round is at a 10 million valuation, you'll give me shares as if it was a 5 million valuation. And these safes in the US and seed fasts in the UK have transformed the way companies fundraise. And on Seed Legals, we now see 70% of the investment raised is not in a funding round, it's before a round or topping up a round. And some people have just embraced it in raising in a completely new way. So one of my favorite examples is a bakery. The founder of the bakery isn't a fintech guru, she's a baker. And she's made like 200 of these seed fasts. And I'm convinced everyone who comes into the bakery, she says, would you like a, baguette? Would you like a sourdough? And would you like a seed fast? And, sometimes small amounts, £500, £1,000. And so what you're doing is you're reaching out to customers, you're reaching out to angel investors, and you're doing these rapid fire small investments that will then convert into shares when you do your funding round later. So when founders hear about this, they probably take a little while to go, I'm still thinking of doing a funding round, until the very next person they meet who goes, sounds great, can I invest? And actually, you didn't need £1 million today. If you had £50,000 or £100,000, you could hire a designer or you could outsource some development. And so you start raising in smaller incremental amounts that let you develop things faster.
I love that. So, I mean, the analogy is actually works all the way through. So with your founding agreements, not the fundraising part, with founding agreements, you're almost predicting and looking at de-risking some of the future problems that can happen. And Seed Legals are also doing that on the funding stage by using these safes or seed fasts and the structures in place to really say, well, these are the problems that could arise. We can prepare you for them, but we can also equip you to act quickly if people approach you on the funding side right now. That's tremendous.
Exactly.
I really
And by the way, I think of legal agreements as really having two purposes. One is at the outset, specifying what each party is meant to do. You're going to give me money, I'm going to give you this number of shares. If you leave the company, I'm going to take some of your shares away, whatever it might be. But the other thing is when things go wrong, when the shit hits the fan, something goes wrong. And I like to think of our legal agreements like the manual in your car. You're driving on the highway, something breaks down in the car, you pull over, you open the glove box, and you look at the manual, and hopefully the manual will tell you the answer. So, when customers, hit us up on web chat on Seed Legals and said, my co-founder is leaving, it's very simple, which is, have you got a founder agreement? If the answer is no, it's kind of pistols at dawn.
Yeah.
There's no way to resolve it. There's no manual. But if you have, we're going to look at the manual, open the manual, and it says the person's left within 6 months, and therefore it's in a cliff period, and therefore and it gets resolved. Or likewise, if you have an investor in the funding round and they don't send money, or they complain about something, will you open the manual and you see? And if the manual's well written, which will be the shareholders agreement in a funding round, it'll tell you what to do. hopefully you've read it beforehand and you've set the terms so that you know what it's going to be, so you don't get an unexpected surprise. But the idea is over decades of fundraising, essentially the ecosystem has evolved quite sophisticated documents to deal with many classes of problems that arise.
And what I love about this is the founder and the founding team are taking control of the process by having these documents, by having access to the expertise, rather than going to the investor and saying, yeah, I'd like some money, but I don't know what to do. And can you give me some documents to sign? Not that
Right.
I
Well,
would advise anybody
that's
to do that.
a great point. A great point that you raise, which is, top tip. If anytime you want to contract with somebody, you should always hold the pen, as it said. You should be the one drafting the contract.
Yeah.
And in a funding round, in the past, because the cost of legals and the fact was completely impenetrable to founders, only lawyers could do this. And it was generally the investors who drove on everything. And so you got deal terms that you didn't understand with draconian wording that meant the investors could fire you, or on a sale of the business, you got nothing and they got everything, and so on. So the whole point of Seed Legals is to change that and empower founders so that you understand what you're doing, and you can be the one originating the documents. And certainly at early stage rounds, when you're talking to angel investors, you're going to be creating the documents. They're not going to be going to lawyers to pay for documents. So you're driving. And then my goal at Seed Legals is to come up with the right sort of balanced set of things. If it's too founder friendly, then investors are going to want to use their own lawyers. And if it's too investor friendly, then you're screwed as a founder.
Yeah.
So how can you come up with something that makes sense? And the reality is, every startup is different with its ideas, but funding rounds turn out to be remarkably the same. So, the first round is at this kind of valuation. You've got these angel investors and they get these rights. And within a narrow range of things, it's actually the same. And anytime somebody wants something really different, it's actually a bad thing. It's like getting a Saab car where the key is put in under the wheel, something weird. It's like
Yeah.
nobody knows how to operate it. You're much better off with standardization.
No, that's superb. That's really informative. I'm just gonna we're coming to the end of our live stream, and you've been giving us some stories. Now, for anybody that's joined us here or picks up on this a little bit later, feel free to put questions in the chat even after this is finished. We'll do our best as the Ronnies or Anthony might be able to answer some questions. So feel free afterwards to answer some questions as well. Just in the remaining couple of minutes, assuming you haven't signed an NDA on any of these, but are there any? Is there a story, or is there anything that really springs to mind of? You've already mentioned one with the bakery, but how you've sort of helped a founding team with putting a structure in place, and how it's been really beneficial to them.
Well, there are endless stories over the years. Probably my favorite one is, companies, reach out to us on web chat, and our support team might then escalate that internally in a Slack discussion where they need more legal help or something. And probably the best example of needing a founder agreement was somebody messaged us saying, our CTO is currently in prison on charges of attempted murder after a drug deal went wrong. What should we do next? And my slightly scathing reply was, they're a bad lever. So for those who don't know, you've got, when you do a founder agreement or an employment agreement, and people get shares with vesting, this means if they leave in 3 years or whatever, they have to give back some of their shares. And they are usually fall into a good lever or a bad lever. A good lever is somebody who might die or become ill, or leave voluntarily or something. And a bad leave is somebody who's fired for gross negligence or has a criminal conviction and so on. And so in this case, the problem was the CTO was probably not welcome back, may not even have been coming back anytime soon. And if the company had 30% of the shares with a founder who was now in prison, this was not going to be helpful for the company in future. And fortunately, they had a founder agreement, and the person was, going to be, I mean, after they were convicted at least, certainly a bad leaver under the definition. Then it means they would lose their shares. Whether you can debate whether this was right or wrong, but the point is the company could then go off and find some other CTO and would have shares for them and so on as well. So that was definitely quite a graphic example. And when you hit up on WordChat, CTOs in prison after attempted murder and a drug deal gone wrong. So, okay, that's weird. Usually it's a minor spat about the value of a share price or something. So, yeah.
No, that's a superb story. Anthony, I could chat with you all afternoon about this, but unfortunately we're at the end of our time for our live stream. How can people get hold of you or get hold of Seed Legals? I know they can contact the 12 Ronnies and we can direct them to you, but if they want to go directly to you, what's the best way of getting hold of you?
Sure. It's Anthony Rose on LinkedIn. You can get me at anthony@seedlegals.com, or you could just head over to seedlegals.com and hit the web chat, and our team are there to help. And if you mention this conversation, they can also connect you with me from there.
Fabulous. We'll also post the details in the live stream chat so people can get hold of your details. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks.
We're ending the stream now. Bye. Okay. And